The obsidian spire of the Grand Conclave chamber pierced the atmospheric ceiling of Xylos Prime, a monument to 10 millennia of organized governance, its polished surfaces reflecting the cool, spectral light cast by the slow-pulsing central orb. Within this vast, vaulted space, where the very air seemed heavy with the weight of bureaucratic inertia and ancient decree, the representatives of the stellar concordance sat in hushed, agitated communion. The primary display shimmered, showing a vector map of the outer veil, a region previously considered catalogued, tamed, a mere footnote in the galactic registry. Now that region was a source of profound, unsettling static in the otherwise smooth flow of interstellar awareness. Elder Krell, the Scythian delegate whose carapace absorbed and refracted the dim light with an almost mournful dignity, leaned forward, his compound eyes focusing intently on the anomaly signature. "The data remains immutable, esteemed censor," Krell articulated, his voice a low, resonant thrum that carried effortlessly across the expansive floor. "The energy profile registered is not emergent. It is manufactured, and critically its source vector resolves directly to the sector designated Terra Nova, the historical locus of the species designated Homo sapiens." A collective ripple of discomfort moved through the assembled council. The designation itself carried a stigma, a historical scar etched into the Concordance archives, Deathworlders. A designation earned not through malice, but through sheer, terrifying biological obstinacy in the face of overwhelming environmental hostility. They were a species whose very origin planet defied classification, a world of volatile tectonics, corrosive atmosphere, and ceaseless biological competition that should, by all logical metrics, have precluded advanced sentience from ever arising. Censor Valerius, the chief arbitrator of the Zalosian Directorate, shifted his bioluminescent cranial crest, the light flickering from placid azure to anxious violet. "Immutable, Elder Krell, yes, but the implication of the signature is what demands our measured attention. It is a broadcast, an SOS, emanating from a derelict platform near the Kepler Rift. A standard distress beacon, utilizing frequencies consistent with pre-first contact universal protocols. Why would a species categorized as pre-integration, barely capable of stable warp signatures beyond their local cluster, possess the technology or the audacity to broadcast distress across sectors?" Valerius paused, allowing the implication to settle. The idea of a species they had collectively placed under soft quarantine, deemed too volatile for full inclusion, suddenly demanding attention. Vorlag, the representative of the Krill technocracy, whose metallic chassis always seemed too solid, too unyielding for the ethereal atmosphere of the chamber, interjected with sharp, synthesized clicks that translated instantly. "Audacity is their hallmark, censor. Their historical projections show erratic bursts of technological acceleration followed by self-inflicted societal collapse. Their classification as Deathworlders is predicated on their inability to maintain stable, long-term infrastructure. This beacon, if genuine, is an outlier, likely a remnant of some failed internal experiment. To respond is to risk contamination of the established quarantine parameters." Vorlag's analysis was rooted in statistical pragmatism, the ingrained Krill belief that randomness was a flaw to be eliminated. They saw the humans as a persistent mathematical error. "Contamination of parameters," Elder Krell countered, his tone gaining a rare edge of philosophical disagreement. "We have observed them for 3 of their millennia since basic radio contact. Their trajectory is unpredictable, yes, but their potential is undeniable. They possess a conceptual framework for rapid adaptation that surpasses even the synaptic networks of the older races. Their biology forces constant, high-stakes problem-solving. To ignore a genuine signal of distress, regardless of the source's origin classification, violates the core edict of mutual sentience preservation." Krell understood the fear. Humans were capable of generating chaos, but he also perceived the underlying resilience that chaos fostered. The tension tightened, a palpable pressure within the vault. For centuries, the stellar concordance had maintained a delicate equilibrium, based on shared technological principles and mutual non-aggression, primarily enforced by the overwhelming technological superiority of the established core races. Humanity existed at the very periphery of their concern, a minor variable in the galactic equation, a species whose primary contribution to the census was their high rate of internal conflict and their unnerving capacity to weaponize everything they touched, including abstract concepts. To suggest active engagement now felt like deliberately striking a volatile nerve. Censor Valerius signaled for silence, his violet crest stabilizing into a deep, thoughtful indigo. We must consider the nature of the SOS. It is not a generalized hailing frequency. It is highly specific, ancient code, a signal typically reserved for existential threat scenarios detected by an established, if peripheral, navigational grid, a grid that should not exist in that region. If this distress call is genuine, it suggests an event of catastrophic magnitude has occurred in the immediate vicinity of a human outpost. If we ignore it, and that event is infectious, a weaponized plague, a reality distortion, we risk far more than a breach of protocol. He projected the incoming data stream onto the primary field. It was a tight, rhythmic pulse, overlaid with complex, modulated carrier waves, a symphony of desperation encoded by a civilization struggling for breath. The beacon has been active for 40 solar cycles, stated a newly activated sensor delegate, a being whose body was a complex crystalline lattice designed for pure data processing. Our remote scans confirm the signal emanates from a single aging structure, orbiting a gas giant near the edge of the veiled nebula. The structure is heavily damaged. Spectral analysis suggests catastrophic kinetic impacts inconsistent with natural phenomena. Vorlag clicked again, sharper this time. Kinetic impact, precisely what I predicted. A local war, perhaps a nuclear exchange that escalated beyond their crude containment measures. They are destroying themselves, as is their statistical inclination. The concordance should transmit a standard informational buffer, a passive diagnostic, and then cease monitoring. We do not commit vessels to salvage operations in quarantined space. But what if the impact was not self-inflicted? Krell pressed, his gaze unwavering. What if the distress call is not the result of their own limitations, but a desperate warning against something they encountered? If the species is indeed as biologically tenacious as the historical records suggest, they would not surrender so easily. A final broadcast before annihilation implies a threat too large for them to manage alone. The silence returned, heavier now, weighted by the possibility of an unknown external variable. The Deathworlders, dismissed as chaotic internecine fighters, might have stumbled upon something truly monstrous, something they had the inherent resilience to survive long enough to warn others about. The philosophy of the concordance demanded risk assessment based on data, not prejudice. And the data indicated a distress signal of critical urgency, originating from a location near the edge of known stable space. Sensor Valerius made his decision, the gravity of which settled upon the Council like a physical shroud. We cannot risk universal ignorance. We will dispatch a minimal, low-signature exploratory probe, designated Pioneer Echo. It will proceed under cloaking protocols to the signal locus. No contact will be initiated until full analysis confirms the nature of the threat and the viability of the survivors. Elder Krell, your expertise in xenolinguistics and cultural inference will be essential for analysis upon arrival. Vorlag, your directorate will provide the most advanced sensor suite capable of rapid threat assessment. We initiate mobilization. The concordance acknowledges the distress call. We observe the Deathworlders. The decision was made not with enthusiasm, but with the grim, measured reluctance of custodians facing a potential contagion. The sheer audacity of humanity, to survive long enough, to develop the mechanism of interstellar communication, only to broadcast a cry for help from the void, was something the ancient, structured empires of the concordance struggled to categorize. It was a variable too large for their comfort, a potential crack in the edifice of their meticulously ordered galaxy. They sent the probe, not out of benevolence, but out of the cold, calculating necessity of maintaining galactic stability. The ensuing silence in the chamber was not resolution, but the deep, unnerving calm before a true storm, the kind of storm that only a civilization built on the razor edge of survival could possibly summon. The journey of the Pioneer Echo was a masterpiece of controlled discretion, a slow, painstaking crawl through the fringes of charted space, utilizing folding space corridors known only to the Concordance navigational core. For 3 subjective cycles, the probe drifted, its advanced sensory arrays silently drinking in the ambient radiation, cosmic dust patterns, and faint gravitational whispers of the Keltos rift. The target structure resolved slowly, an immense skeletal framework, half consumed by the swirling storms of the gas giant, its bulk suggesting a construction capability far exceeding the known technological ceiling of the species designated Homo sapiens. It was ancient, scarred by Een. Argy's no known conventional weapon could inflict, and chillingly silent, save for the persistent, faint SOS beacon. When the Pioneer Echo finally achieved a stable, high-synchronous orbit around the derelict, the initial assessment sent back to Xylos Prime caused a near-total system shutdown in the monitoring stations. The structure was not a typical human habitat or orbital station. It was a megastructure, a sprawling, multi-layered defense matrix, clearly designed not for comfort or commerce, but for sustained, brutal warfare. Its scale suggested an industrial capacity that belied the known meager resources of the early human species. Elder Krell received the raw telemetry in a specialized observation cell, shielded from the political noise of the main conclave. The images flooded his visual receptors. Vast, blackened hulls of ships, impossibly large, fused into the station's structure, their designs brutalist, purely functional, lacking any of the aesthetic flourishes favored by established galactic powers. And then the anomaly within the anomaly, life signs. Faint, flickering, but undeniably present. A handful of biosignatures, barely clinging to existence within the core sector of the ruin. "Sensor Valerius," Krell transmitted, his voice tight with suppressed shock. "The scale of this installation is erroneous relative to known human development matrices. This structure predates their established warp capability by centuries, perhaps millennia. And the wreckage surrounding it, these are not the kinetic impacts of a minor skirmish. This is the aftermath of a sustained engagement against a force of significant magnitude." Valerius's projected avatar appeared beside Krell's console, his violet light flickering with barely contained alarm. "But the SOS, Elder. It is a recent broadcast originating from that core. If this structure is ancient, why the distress signal now? And if the inhabitants are survivors of an ancient engagement, why are they only now signaling?" "That is the critical divergence," Krell murmured, zooming into a stabilized cross-section of the main habitat core. The environment was toxic, radiation levels spiking intermittently, yet the biosignatures remained localized around a specific, heavily shielded node. "The broadcast frequency matches the current Concordance distress template, not the ancient ones. They have either reverse-engineered our template with impossible speed, or they were expecting us, using our own language of crisis." The Concordance protocol was absolute. If a quarantine species demonstrated capacity beyond its developmental ceiling, immediate, overt contact was initiated, not for integration, but for containment and study. The sheer technological leap implied by surviving the inferred conflict and then constructing an operational distress beacon suggested that humanity was no longer a statistical error. It was a catastrophic outlier requiring immediate intervention. Valerius made the final, weighty call. "We elevate the mission profile. A single, heavily armed diplomatic vessel, the Aegis of Order, will proceed to rendezvous. We will not cloak. We present ourselves as the authority that has answered the distress. Elder Krell, you will lead the initial contact team, prepared for full linguistic and diplomatic engagement. Vorlag, prepare a fleet deployment to the edge of the Veil as a secondary deterrent, but do not engage unless the Aegis transmits a Tier 3 threat warning." The mobilization was swift, yet imbued with the solemnity reserved for confronting the unknown margins of galactic stability. The Aegis of Order, a vessel designed for silent deterrence and rapid negotiation, exited fold space near the derelict installation, its massive form eclipsing the distant gas giant. As it settled into a steady, visible orbit, it broadcasted a carefully calibrated, non-threatening hailing sequence utilizing the standard Concordance opening chord, a sequence designed to convey both authority and cautious respect. For a full rotation cycle, only silence returned, the ancient SOS beacon continuing its rhythmic pulse against the vast, dead structure. Then, the silence broke, not with a coded response, but with a sudden, violent surge of energy dissipation as the heavily shielded habitat core jettisoned a single, small vessel. This vessel was an absolute affront to galactic aesthetics. It was brutally angular, crudely welded, painted in dull, matte black and utilitarian gray, bristling with external sensor arrays and redundant life support scaffolding. It was the visual embodiment of a species prioritizing function over form, survival over elegance. It moved with a terrifying, almost reckless efficiency, accelerating directly toward the imposing mass of the Aegis of Order. Krell watched the approach on the main viewer, his multifaceted eyes struggling to process the sheer lack of finesse. "Sensor, their response vessel appears primitive, yet its drive signature is Generat. In near-perfect metric thrust efficiency, anomalous. Primitive aesthetics often mask potent underlying engineering," Valerius replied, his voice tight. They are approaching without full hailing acknowledgement. They seem to be prioritizing a direct intercept. As the small craft closed the distance, it did not request docking clearance or initiate standard security protocols. Instead, it stabilized precisely 300 meters from the primary docking aperture of the Aegis. And then, impossibly, it opened an external communication channel, not on the concordance frequency, but on a universal open broadcast band. A voice flooded the bridge of the Aegis, transmitted across the gap with jarring clarity. It was a human voice, male, calm, utterly devoid of the traditional hesitancy or deference expected from a fledgling species addressing an established power. It was the voice of someone accustomed to asserting control over chaos. This is the vessel Vigilance, designation Recovery 1. We acknowledge your arrival, Aegis of Order. We detect your security posture, cease active scanning. We have initiated a quarantine field around the derelict structure. We are not wounded. We are secure. We require immediate, direct data uplink and confirmation of your non-hostile intent. Identify your primary arbiter. The sheer abruptness of the communication stunned the Concordance Bridge crew into momentary paralysis. This was not a plea for salvation. It was an inspection. The Deathworlders were treating the arrival of the Concordance exploratory vessel as an expected, if slightly late, utility service. Krell leaned into the microphone, his internal processors racing to formulate a response that acknowledged the reversal of expected power dynamics without compromising Concordance authority. I am Elder Krell of the Scythian Ascendancy, representing the Stellar Concordance. We responded to your distress signal. Identify the nature of the threat that necessitated such a broadcast. The human voice returned instantly, devoid of inflection, purely operational. The threat is contained. The SOS was not for our rescue, Elder Krell. It was a warning. We initiated the broadcast 40 cycles ago upon verifying the nature of the existential event. You are receiving this transmission because our primary objective has been achieved: to transmit data regarding the entity known as the Void Scourge before our remaining resources were expended. We require full upload capability now. Do you permit secure access to your primary network core? The term Void Scourge resonated through the Concordance databases, a mythological classification, a theoretical threat speculated upon by fringe archaeoscientists, spoken of as the ultimate entropy, the thing that consumed civilizations entirely. To hear it named by the humans and presented as an active, verified threat was deeply disturbing. Sensor Valerius, monitoring from Xylos Prime, authorized a cautious data handshake. Elder Krell, permit limited read-only access. Verify the threat level, but maintain strict procedural isolation. Krell gave the order. The human vessel, Vigilance, sent a compressed, encrypted package. The data flowed into the Aegis mainframe, bypassing superficial analysis filters and dumping directly into the high-level threat assessment core. The resulting readouts were immediate and catastrophic. The package contained detailed schematics of the Void Scourge, not theoretical models, but forensic analyses of its structure, its method of propagation, and most damningly, its propulsion signature. It was a mechanism that utilized dimensional shear to propagate, rendering conventional defenses irrelevant. And within the data stream, Krell saw the truth of the derelict structure. It was not a human habitat, but a massive, multi-species containment field constructed millennia ago, likely by an unknown, vanished precursor race, and the humans had somehow stumbled upon it and reactivated its final self-destruct sequence, using the SOS as a final failsafe trigger. Sensor, Krell breathed, staring at the synthesized tactical overlay showing the Scourge's predicted invasion vector, which intersected established Concordance territory within 3 standard years. The threat is absolute. The data confirms the Scourge is an extinction-level force. The human vessel, they were not survivors of a prior conflict. They were custodians of a cage. The transfer of the lead diplomatic party from the Aegis to the Vigilance was conducted under the highest level of tension imaginable. Krell led a small contingent of Scythian analysts and Krill security specialists, equipped with full environmental compensation suits, a necessity given the toxic atmosphere of the derelict. The human vessel, however, refused a physical transfer. We will maintain quarantine integrity around the containment unit, the human voice, identified now as Captain Eva Rostova, stated over the secure chan. As Krell's shuttle approached the Vigilance airlock, Our environment is biohazardous to non-endemic species. We will conduct diplomacy here in the staging bay. We require you to maintain a standoff distance of 5 meters from our hull. Any closer, and we will assume hostile intent and initiate defensive protocols. This was an inversion of every established protocol. They were not being invited in. They were being permitted to observe from a safe distance. Krell activated his external visual enhancers, fixing his gaze upon the single, recessed viewport of the Vigilance. He could discern only faint movement behind the polarized glass, a shadow of a figure standing perfectly still. "Captain Rostova," Krell projected, maintaining the formal, measured cadence expected of a high envoy. "We understand the severity of the data you have transmitted. However, the concordance requires direct confirmation of the operational status of your civilization. Your SOS indicated distress, yet your presentation suggests total control of the situation. We must reconcile these contradictions to integrate this threat vector into our strategic planning." A long silence followed, marked only by the faint, rhythmic pulsing of the SOS beacon from the structure behind them. When Captain Rostova finally responded, her voice held a quality that was profoundly unsettling to the ancient races. It was the sound of absolute, untroubled clarity, unburdened by doubt or political maneuvering. "Elder Krell, the contradiction you perceive is a product of your cultural framework. The distress signal was not for our rescue. It was a protocol. When the precursor field stabilized its final containment cycle, a cycle we initiated, it required a universal broadcast to force the attention of any nearby advanced civilization capable of processing the data. We are not distressed. We are concluding a mission." Krell felt a coldness that transcended physical temperature. "Concluding a mission? You expended your entire remaining strategic presence to transmit a warning. What of your civilization? Where are the remnants of Homo sapiens?" "We are here," Rostova replied simply. "The Vigilance crew, 7 individuals. We are the mechanism for data transmission and final resource allocation. The remainder of our species has made its own dispositions." This level of calculated sacrifice, of prioritizing abstract data dissemination over the survival of the immediate unit, was alien to the Concordance mindset, which prized the continuity of the collective lineage above all else. "Disposition," Vorlag's synthesized voice cut in from the Aegis, projecting across the communication array. "Elaborate on disposition. Have you entered self-imposed stasis, abandoned your core worlds?" Rostova's reply was immediate and devastatingly final. "Our core worlds are under deep-layer adaptive quarantine, prepared decades ago based on predictive modeling of the Scourge's evolutionary track. We did not abandon them. We shielded them. Our final directive was ensuring that the data package reached a civilization with the necessary infrastructure to mount an interstellar defense. The civilization that survived the Scourge once must advise those who have never faced it." Krell processed the philosophical implications. A species so pragmatic that it views its entire remaining population as expendable infrastructure for a data transfer, yet possessing the foresight and discipline to prepare its home sector for a threat centuries away. Their danger was not their volatility, but their terrifying, unshakable commitment to long-term ethical calculus. "We require to see you, Captain Rostova," Krell stated, making a bold diplomatic move. "To assess threat mitigation parameters, we need visual confirmation of your command structure and the viability of the containment field. We cannot rely solely on automated transmissions." After another long pause, the airlock cycled open on the Vigilance. The vacuum held for a moment, and then 2 human figures emerged into the staging bay of Krell's shuttle. They were clad in pressurized environmental suits, but these suits were not the bulky, armored affairs favored by the Krill or the segmented biosuits of the Scythians. They were sleek, form-fitting, and utterly devoid of external weaponry mounts. They moved with an economy of motion that spoke of absolute physical conditioning. The leading figure, presumably Captain Rostova, raised a hand in a gesture Krell recognized from ancient archives as a universal sign of non-aggression, a strange, vulnerable presentation of the primary manipulators. "Elder Krell, we respect your protocols, though we find them inefficient. You may approach within 2 meters. My second, Lieutenant Chen, will manage the hardline data interface. We are here to trade knowledge for your assistance in defense mobilization." Krell cautiously approached, the metallic hiss of his environmental systems filling the sudden void of sound. Standing before the human, even through the thick plasteel of his visor, was an experience of profound sensory dissonance. The human seemed smaller than the data suggested, yet radiated an immense, contained pressure. Rostova's posture was relaxed, but every fiber of her being suggested readiness. "Captain Rostova," Krell began, choosing his words with agonizing care. "Your civilization's apparent self-abnegation for the sake of universal warning is noted. We must ascertain the nature of the Scourge's vulnerability. The data package indicated a mechanism for collapse based on resonant harmonic interruption. This is highly theoretical physics." Rostova tilted her head slightly, a gesture that suggested assessment rather than curiosity. "It is not theoretical, Elder. It is empirical. The precursors discovered that the dimensional harmonics required to sustain the Scourge's existence are incredibly delicate. A focused, multispectral energy pulse, timed precisely to the Scourge's transitional phase between dimensional folds, causes a feedback loop that unravels the entity's structural integrity. We have the precursor equations, derived from the core memory banks of this installation." Lieutenant Chen, without a word, extended a heavily armored cable from his suit, interfacing it directly with the external port Krell's shuttle had provided. The exchange of data began not as a negotiation, but as a transfer of critical maintenance procedures. "The issue," Rostova continued, her voice steady, "is that the energy output required to generate that focused pulse must exceed the collective output of 3 established Concordance core fleets operating at maximum sustained yield. The precursor technology was destroyed in the ancient conflict defending this sector. We have the how, Elder. We do not have the power." The reality of the situation settled upon Krell with crushing weight. Humanity had not only faced an existential threat and survived long enough to warn the galaxy. They had been the species holding the line, using technology they barely understood, ultimately sacrificing their operational capacity to ensure the warning was delivered. The arrogance Krell had anticipated was replaced by a terrible, quiet competence. "The Concordance possesses the infrastructure to pool that output," Krell confirmed, fighting to keep the tremor out of his voice. "But to divert that much power risks destabilizing our internal energy grids. We need verifiable, independent confirmation of the precise targeting parameters for this harmonic disruption. We need the precursor's navigational mapping of the Scourge's preferred ingress points." "That data is also present in the package," Rostova said, gesturing toward Chen, who confirmed the transfer completion. "We have provided the location of the 3 critical points in known space where the Scourge is most likely to attempt large-scale manifestation within the next 3 years. We need your fleets positioned there immediately, utilizing the power output as derived in the appended synchronization tables." This was the ultimate test of trust. The Deathworlders, having just saved the galaxy from a mythological horror, were now demanding the Concordance commit its entire defensive strength based on their analysis, a commitment that would leave their own core sectors vulnerable to lesser threats during the mobilization phase. Sensor Valerius, his anxiety reaching critical mass back on Xylos Prime, finally authorized a direct, secure link to Rostova. "Captain Rostova, I am Sensor Valerius of the Zalosian Directorate. Your sacrifice is noted, but diplomacy requires transparency. Why the need for secrecy? If the threat is universal, why did your species not engage the Concordance proactively centuries ago, before your infrastructure decayed to this point?" Rostova turned slowly, facing the invisible presence of the Sensor. "Sensor Valerius, we observed your Concordance for a significant duration of our ascent. Your political structure is based on maintaining systemic inertia through consensus among disparate, highly conservative empires. Your response time to novel, nonlinear threats is measured in solar cycles. The Scourge operates on the scale of temporal harmonics. By the time your bureaucracy achieved consensus on the threat level, the Scourge would have already fractured the veil." She paused, and the air in the staging bay seemed to grow colder. "We initiated the SOS, knowing the Concordance would dispatch a low-signature probe first. We calculated a 98.4% probability that the probe would reach us before the political inertia of the Council allowed for fleet mobilization. We needed the data transferred without delay. We needed you to react before you had time to debate." This was a calculated political gambit executed with surgical precision, utilizing the inherent slowness of the older empires as a strategic advantage. Humanity had engineered a crisis specifically to bypass diplomatic red tape. "You manipulated the arrival of the Concordance," Valerius stated, his tone dangerously level. "We optimized the timeline for survival," Rostova corrected him, the distinction subtle but profound. We value life, all life, enough to ensure that this framework built by the precursors to hold the line did its final duty, to transfer the solution to a civilization capable of deploying the necessary force, regardless of the political maneuvering required to initiate that deployment. Krell intervened before Valerius could issue a punitive response. Captain, your logic is severe, yet mathematically sound given the parameters of the threat. We accept your operational assessment. We will begin the mobilization of the defense triad to the specified points. Elder Krell will remain aboard the Aegis to coordinate the data synchronization and power distribution matrices under your direct supervision. Lieutenant Chen will transmit the final activation sequence locks. The alliance was forged not in a chamber of mutual respect, but in a toxic, desolate docking bay built upon the ruins of a desperate, last-ditch defensive action initiated by a species the galaxy had consistently underestimated. The Deathworlders had delivered their warning, sacrificing their continuity to ensure the survival of the whole. The next 4 standard weeks were an epic of intense, strained collaboration. The Aegis of Order, under Krell's direct, high-level oversight, became the central nexus for the nascent defense network. The Krill, initially deeply skeptical, were nevertheless swayed by the sheer rigor of the mathematical models provided by the human data, models that included corrections for cosmological drift and localized gravitational lensing effects that the standard concordance predictive algorithms had always disregarded as negligible variants. Krell found himself spending long hours in the small, utilitarian briefing room aboard the Vigilance, sitting opposite Rostova and Chen, both of whom maintained their environmental seals and the 5-meter separation, communicating through secure, direct-feed holography overlaid onto the small room. The philosophical gulf between the Scythian and the human remained vast. The Scythians sought elegant solutions. The humans demanded functional results, no matter how ugly the process. Captain Rostova, Krell projected 1 rotation cycle before the scheduled deployment of the defense platforms. Your data on the power synchronization is complex. It requires an energy draw that borders on system collapse for standard fleet conduits. The Krill director Vorlag insists there is a margin of error within the precursor equations regarding ambient zero-point energy absorption that we could utilize to reduce the strain by nearly 20%. Rostova leaned forward slightly in her holographic projection, her human features etched with fatigue, but her eyes sharp. Vorlag is calculating based on established principles of localized energy harvesting. The precursor technology utilized a different approach. They weren't harvesting zero-point energy. They were diverting the localized vacuum decay inherent in dimensional transition. It is a far more violent, less stable method, which is why the precursor civilization ultimately failed to maintain the field indefinitely. It required constant, manual input to prevent cascade failure. Manual input, Krell echoed, horrified. You mean a continuous crew presence? Yes, Elder, Rostova confirmed. That is why the SOS was required. The containment field protecting this sector, the one the Scourge is currently attempting to breach, was beginning to destabilize. We initiated the final self-scuttle of the station to overload the remaining energy buffers, using that surge as the power burst for the warning signal. The containment holding the Scourge at the Kepler Rift edge is held together by sheer, dedicated, programmed inertia. It will fail within weeks without external reinforcement. The implication was staggering. The humans hadn't just sent a warning. They had deliberately destroyed the only known, active containment mechanism to ensure the galaxy received the necessary data before the system failed entirely. Their civilization had accepted self-immolation as the most expedient defense strategy. If the Scourge breaks free at the rift before our defenses are online, Krell whispered, the weight of 10 millennia of accumulated knowledge suddenly feeling like dust. The resulting cascade reaction across the Veil will consume sectors indiscriminately. Rostova nodded, her expression grim. That is why we insisted on speed over protocol. We were not trying to save ourselves, Elder. We were buying you time. Now we must utilize your power to deliver the killing blow at the 3 critical nodes. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place for Krell. Humanity's perceived unpredictability was merely their ability to process and AC. Upon data far faster than political entities bound by tradition. They were not chaotic. They were hyper-efficient in existential crises. We are ready for the final synchronization tests, Krell announced, standing upright. We trust the equations, Captain. The Concordance dedicates its fleet strength to this defense. Deployment was a galaxy-spanning endeavor. The Concordance, galvanized by the irrefutable apocalyptic data stream, mobilized resources on a scale unseen since the Great Consolidation Wars centuries prior. 3 primary defense triads, one led by Zalosian heavy cruisers, one by Krill heavy defense platforms, and one by the Scythian diplomatic guard, were positioned at the vectors provided by Rostova, the Keltos Rift approach, the Cygnus anomaly, and the deep void near the Orion spur. Captain Rostova, directing the final power channeling protocols from the Vigilance, oversaw the integration. She was the conductor of an orchestra comprised of the galaxy's most powerful but disparate musical instruments. Krell, transmit synchronization package Delta 9 to the Cygnus Triad, Rostova commanded, her voice echoing across the immense network. We need the Krill platforms to spool their primary drive cores to 110% capacity for the charging cycle, briefly. Chen, monitor the feedback curve. If the Krill exceed 112%, force an immediate throttle back. Vorlag, furious but compliant, had his systems overridden by the data locks provided by Rostova, which effectively hijacked his power regulators to ensure compliance with the precise energy sequencing required for the harmonic disruption field. This is an unacceptable level of vulnerability, Vorlag's enraged voice blared through the channel. If the charge sequence is interrupted, the resulting backsurge will melt our primary regulators. Understood, Director Vorlag, Rostova replied, her tone maddeningly calm. If you do not comply with the precise sequencing defined by the precursor equations, the scourge will breach the containment field at the rift, and there will be no regulators left to melt. Proceed. The sheer pressure was immense. For hours, the galaxy held its breath, watching energy readings fluctuate wildly as the combined power of the Concordance was focused into 3 invisible points in deep space, channeled according to the salvaged knowledge of a species long dead, guided by the immediate, uncompromising will of 7 humans. Then the confirmation arrived from the Keltos Rift Triad. It was not a triumphant declaration, but a single, stark spectral reading. Vector 1 clear, reported the Scythian liaison at the Rift. The Scourge manifestation wave has been terminated. Hull integrity nominal. Energy dispersal calculated at 99.998% efficiency against the predicted harmonic frequency. 1 vector down. The Void Scourge, the ultimate entropy, had been stopped not by overwhelming firepower, but by the precise application of an esoteric scientific principle delivered through a desperate, self-sacrificing warning. Across the network, a cautious sigh rippled through the Concordance forces. The crisis was averted, the galaxy preserved by the very species they had deemed too dangerous to fully embrace. Sensor Valerius, watching the success readout, transmitted a message directly to Rostova, a message stripped of formality, carrying the immense emotional weight of the established order acknowledging its own flawed judgment. Captain Rostova, the Concordance Directorate offers its profound, unqualified gratitude. You have saved the balance of the known sectors. We wish to extend full integration status to the remaining members of Homo sapiens and offer any resource necessary to rebuild and recover. Rostova's holographic image flickered slightly as the feedback from the final 2 nodes was processed. Chen was monitoring the energy drain, ensuring the system could safely retract without backlash. Sensor Valerius, Rostova replied, the tone now shifting, losing the sharp edge of crisis management and adopting a tone of somber finality. We appreciate the offer, but it is unnecessary. The integration protocol was never our primary objective, nor is recovery. Krell felt a profound sense of dread. Captain, what do you mean? You have secured the galaxy. There is no threat remaining that requires this level of dedicated action. Rostova looked directly into Krell's multifaceted eyes, and for the first time, Krell perceived genuine sorrow in the human expression. Elder Krell, when we initiated the SOS, we were not only warning you about the Scourge. We were utilizing the energy spike of the precursor containment field's collapse to send one final, extremely powerful, encrypted signal outward. A signal intended for something far older, far larger than the Scourge, something we feared would track the energy signature of the Scourge's destruction. Lieutenant Chen finalized the power retraction sequence. The combined energy draw ceased instantly, the fleets returning to standard operational readiness. The silence that followed was absolute, far more terrifying than the chaos of battle. The scourge was a consequence, Rostova continued, her voice a quiet murmur that somehow filled the entire communication network. It was a predator drawn to the energy footprint of a civilization fighting for survival. We analyzed the precursor's final logs. They did not destroy the scourge, they merely held it at bay for eons. When they failed, they built the beacon to warn the next iteration of life. We fulfilled that duty. She paused, letting the crushing weight of her words settle over the galaxy's governing body. But the precursor logs also detailed the true threat, the entity that created the scourge, the true architects of dimensional predation. They were attempting to lure it out of hiding by setting off a massive, controlled energy signature at this location, a sacrificial flare. They failed. We succeeded in replicating the flare by destroying the containment field. Rostova straightened, projecting an entirely new set of coordinates, far beyond the known boundaries of the known spiral arm, pointing toward the true, empty dark between galaxies. The message we sent was not just a warning about the scourge. It was a challenge. By successfully eliminating the scourge using precursor methods, we demonstrated that the local sector is now defended, stabilized, and capable of generating complex, coordinated defense strategies. Censor Valerius, Elder Krell, Director Vorlag, we have announced our presence to the entity that designed the scourge. We have proven we are ready to fight. The new coordinates pulsed on the screens of every concordance ship, every governing body, a beacon calling into the deepest abyss. We sent an SOS to the galaxy to stop the known danger, Rostova concluded, a faint, almost grim smile touching her lips on the holoscreen. We sent a signal to the dark to provoke the real danger. The Deathworlders have drawn the first true enemy to our doorstep. We believe you require new adversaries to unify your concordance. You now have them. We transfer command of the defense protocols to the Scythian Krill-Xylosian Unified Command Structure. The Vigilance crew is retiring from active service. We have done our part. The tiny, insignificant human vessel, which had initiated the entire sequence, abruptly powered down its external broadcast array. It did not request permission for departure. It simply disconnected, folding its small, battered form back into the void, leaving the greatest military and political alliance the galaxy had ever known facing a vector leading toward the ultimate, uncatalogued horror. A confrontation they were now technologically equipped for, but philosophically unprepared to face. Krell stared at the coordinates, the spectral light of the Grand Conclave chamber suddenly seeming weak and insufficient against the backdrop of the cosmic abyss the humans had just illuminated. Humanity had revealed itself not as a chaotic species deserving containment, but as a ruthless, dedicated vanguard, willing to sacrifice everything, including its own future recognition, to ensure the defense of others. They had pulled the galaxy out of complacency, not with diplomacy, but with the chilling, undeniable efficacy of their ultimate sacrifice. The long, quiet march toward the new war had just begun, guided by the final, devastating lesson imparted by the Deathworlders. The fear of humanity had been replaced by an even greater fear, the understanding of what humanity was truly capable of.